Um, Welcome into 716 Sports Blizzard podcast. Today my guests are Chris
Hi,
Pomay and Nick Small from the Argo Bounce podcast.
the Argo Bounce live audio show, and we're both from Ontario. Nick is from a city called Clarkson, which is just outside of Toronto, and I'm from Guelph, and I'm sure Nick will say the same thing. Thank you so much for having us on tonight.
Yep, we're excited to bring a little bit of the 416 and the 905 here to the 716 today.
How are you doing, Robbie?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to have you guys on the show.
How long have you been doing your podcast for, Robbie?
Um, this will be my third or fourth year doing my podcast.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
That's impressive.
So, what made you wanting to get into podcasting, Robbie, if you don't mind me asking you a question?
Um, well, I had this one friend, Ron, who had a podcast on his own, and like watching him talk about hockey, getting into like the Sabres and all the teams in the NHL, and like talking about football. Um, Wanted me to do a podcast because I like talking about Buffalo and the Bisons and Bandits.
Well, I can tell you, Chris is extremely knowledgeable about the Bison and the Bandits. This guy goes, I don't know how many times across the board a year, but it seems like every other week he's over there at least doing some media coverage for them, which is really awesome. There's sometimes in Toronto among our other sports teams, maybe not so much the Argos, but more with like the Leafs and the Jays and the Raptors. There's a little bit of elitism being at the top, but you don't seem to have that once you get down to kind of the minor leagues like the Bison. So it's really awesome that Chris is able to get there and have all those fantastic media opportunities.
And the Bandits are champions again for the sixth time, back to back. Buffalo's most successful team is the Buffalo Bandits. I know you have a Bills hat on, but the Bills haven't got the job done in the Super Bowl. The Bandits are a tremendous organization, and same with the Buffalo Bisons. They are the Toronto Blue Jays' top farm team. So I get to interview players before Hazel May of Sportsnet in Toronto does. So I kind of look at what I'm doing is what the Bisons are doing, try to get myself into the big leagues, and it's great baseball too. By the way, Robbie.
Yeah, and I like the manager over there, KC Candell, or
Candau,
yeah,
AC Candau,
um,
very nice man. He's a former Major League ball player, second baseman with the Montreal Expos, Houston Astros, Cleveland Indians, and he's a tremendous manager. And I've been able to interview him a number of times. How have you met him, Robbie?
um, I I haven't gotten a chance to meet him, like, but I've seen your videos with him, and he seems like a nice guy.
He is, and I hope one day you get to meet him. Now, have you met any of the Bisons or the Buffalo Bandit players?
Um, I haven't like met a Bandits player, but back in like 2008 when the Bandits had the the good team like with Johnny Turris and all them, and now that Johnny T's the coach of the Bandits, I like him too.
So, well, Robbie, this is your show. So, do you have questions for Nick and I? And what would you like to talk about or ask us?
How did you, Chris, start in the radio business?
Well, a couple years ago, just before the pandemic, I was doing some volunteer work with a semi-pro basketball team called the Guelph Nighthawks. They needed a camera operator, and I was a volunteer at the time. And I said, "Okay, sure, why not?" I had never done camera work before, and after the game was over, they liked my camera work. They actually paid me for it. Then they referred me to Rogers TV, which is a major TV cable company in Toronto that owns a lot of teams. And before the pandemic, I started doing camera work for Rogers TV and covering the Ontario Hockey League, which is a developmental junior league for the National Hockey League. And when the pandemic struck, I told a producer, I'm going to start a podcast show up. He smirked at me because I don't think he believed me. And in March of 2020, I started my podcast. And a couple years later, I ended up on WQEE 99.1 FM radio station in Georgia. And I've now doing some media work for the Bisons, freelance independent work for the Bisons, the Bandits, the Toronto Argonauts, the Canadian Football League, the Grey Cup, and the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame as well. So just volunteering and being at the right place at the right time gave me a taste of broadcasting. And that's how I got into this, Robbie.
When did you, Chris, and Nick, when did you guys start the Argo Bounce audio podcast?
Nick, you go ahead.
Yep. So, to be honest, I don't really remember exactly the story of how we first met or when we ran into each other. Probably it was probably at BMO Field when Chris was doing his media work for the Argos, and met him. I've seen some of his videos on social media, and we got together. We started talking. We connected a lot about the Argonauts, and it was just coming out of the pandemic. I think it was the 2022 season that we
Correct.
started up our show, and it just happened to roll into that perfect season. As we know how that year came about, the Toronto Argonauts fought through a lot of adversity. They had, I think, just a 4-4 record at midway through the season, and then they managed to pull, I think it was a 5-3 or a 6-2 record to close the regular season, and then they ended up rolling into Regina, beating the favorite Winnipeg Blue Bombers to win the Grey Cup. And through that whole journey, we got together. We decided to just start this little weekly show where we just talked a little bit about the game, about things that were going on outside of it, big inductions to the all-time Argos list, and getting other Argonaut former players and media personalities on as guests, and it just kind of rolled into what it is now. And I think in our last podcast was one of our most engaged episodes we've ever had, and having a lot of good comments and feedback, chats with individuals like yourself. And yeah, like I said before, we've had some really great guests as well. People like Don Landry, Damon Allen, Mike Hogan's been a frequent guest. So we've had some really fantastic people come on to just share our love with the Toronto Argonauts.
The Canadian Football League has been around since 1958, but there was Canadian football before that. So the NFL has been around a long time, but the Canadian Football League's been around a long time as well. There's 9 teams here, Robbie, and our championship is called the Grey Cup, and it's been around for 110 years, and it's one of the nicest trophy to win. And the difference between the CFL and the NFL is 4 downs. CFL 3 downs, and the CFL field is the end zones in the CFL are 20 yards longer and the NFL's are 10 yards. And I think for fields, CFL fields 110 yards by 65,
Yep.
and the NFL fields are 100 by for 53 yards. So it's still football, but the CFL is just a little bit different with the 3 downs instead of 4, and some of the rules and stuff like that. And Nick, you want to explain to him what a rouge is in the
Yes.
CFL?
So the CFL has a lot of, to Americans would probably be wacky rules that in a way help excite the play of the game. So the Rouge is kind of one of the most well-known ones in the NFL. When players attempt a field goal and it misses wide, right or left, or they punt and they trying to kick it into the corner, but it goes through the end zone for a touchback. Normally, that's just the ball gets put out. I know it used to be the 20. I don't know what it is now in the NFL, but they move the ball out and they just keep playing. In the CFL, that actually awards you a single point. And that's what the Rouge is, the Rouge being the 1 point. But it adds a huge element of strategy, because there's scenarios where sometimes you might be able to you might miss the game-winning field goal, but you can still kick it through for the 1 point to tie a game up, for instance, if you're down by 1. And sometimes it leads to interesting scenarios where if they miss, then the team, because the field goal post is at the goal line and not behind the end zone, it
Like the
means
NFL.
that when they miss, the guy who catches the ball, rather than trying to run it out, they can punt it out. And there's a really good example of that in the mid 2010s in a match the Toronto Argonauts played against the Montreal Alouettes, fittingly enough. And I know I was at that game, and my family were probably some of the only people who actually knew the rule of and why they were doing that kick out, because of the Rouge. So there's things like that. Another good example is the waggle, which means that all the wide receivers are allowed to move prior to the snap, not just one player like in the NFL. The 3 downs we talked about, there's a term called no yards. So instead of the receiver waving in the air to catch the ball, being
Like the
no,
fair
don't,
catch.
yeah, the fair catch. Instead, in the CFL, you have the no yards. So you must give a 5-yard ring around whoever's catching the ball. And if you don't, you take a penalty. And that just encourages returners to be able to actually field the ball and make a play instead. So all these rules, in our opinion, or at least mine, make a much more exciting game, because they allow players to provide more, and there's another added layer of strategy.
Robbie, thoughts on that?
Like, what is a safety in Canadian football?
That's when the quarterback is tackled or the ball carrier is tackled in the end zone. So we do have safeties in the
Mhm.
in the CFL as well. And the CFL has an 18-game schedule. For your viewers, Robbie, they only have 2 preseason games. The NFL has 3. The CFL went to an 18-game season in 1986. The NFL now is at 17 games, but I like the CFL's 2 preseason and 18 regular season games. And then they have the playoffs, and then the Grey Cup is usually at the end of November here. The Grey Cup is called the Grey Cup Championship for the champion of the Canadian Football League, and 9 teams have a chance at it every year. And our Toronto Argonauts have the most Grey Cup wins, 18-time Grey Cup champions, and they've won 8 Grey Cups the last 40 years, and they haven't lost a Grey Cup since 1987 against the Edmonton then Eskimos. They're now called the Elks, by the way. So that's, yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, sorry, just one thing I wanted to go back to. We were talking about the safety. So yes, the safety is is essentially the same in how it's generated in the NFL, where the quarterback or the ball carrier is tackled in their own end zone. But one thing, because of the larger field in the CFL and the fact that they don't punt it in the CFL after a safety, they just kick it off like a regular field goal after. Um, it adds an extra element of strategy, though, because sometimes what you'll see, if a team's leading by 5 points, for instance, they might intentionally take a safety if they're back at their own 10-yard line, because if they punt the ball, the opposing team might get the ball in the defending team's field position, like at say the 40-yard line. So because of the larger field, it's sometimes more strategic to take a safety on purpose and kick the ball back off, and now pin them at their own 30-yard line and make them march another 40 yards down the field. So it again, it's just one other thing, an element of the Canadian game that makes it more exciting, in my opinion, than the NFL. But at the end of the day, it's all football. And what I think was pretty funny is, although a lot of Canadian fans were disappointed that we didn't have a Canada Day football game this year, we had a game on U.S. Independence Day, which was pretty funny. So the only football Americans got to watch was ours.
Absolutely. Hey, Robbie, have you been able to watch a CFL game yet or not?
I haven't been able to find the station for it in the
Nick,
States.
Nick, it's on what? ESPN 2 and 3 and CBS Sports Network?
Yeah, I'm not sure entirely about ESPN with its TSN rights, how that exactly works.
Okay.
But CBS does have the rights for a number of CFL games this year, which includes the East semifinals, the East finals, and will include the Grey Cup. They've typically also hosted some of the major games like the Touchdown Atlantic in the past. Will be Touchdown Pacific this year, and they usually hold. They have a number of second half, like post Labor Day games as the playoffs ramp up. Usually, they have at least one game a week broadcasted. And then in addition, there's a service that the CFL provides, a streaming service on their website called CFL Plus. And as long as the game's not already being aired on TV, you can watch it on the streaming site for free. I think you just have to sign up with your email address. But once you submit that, they you get access to any of the games that are being broadcasted live on any. It's basically the TSN feed, so you get all the commentary that they provide on TV and the halftime stuff, any of that. And then the other great thing about it is that it's available globally. So even if you're not an American or Canadian, you can watch it in any other part of the world on CFL Plus for free, which is an amazing thing that the league has brought forward over the last 2 years.
Robbie, there are 9 teams and there's 2 divisions. The CFL has the East and the West. In the East, you got Toronto, the Argonauts, Hamilton Tiger Cats, boo. The Montreal Alouettes, the defending Grey Cup champions, the Evil Empire, and the Ottawa Red Blacks. And the West, Nick, tell them who the teams are in the West. There's 5 teams in the western part of the CFL.
Yep. In the West, you have the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They won back-to-back Grey Cups 3 years ago, and then they lost the last 2 to Toronto and Montreal. Funnily enough, the 2 they won, they beat Hamilton, so that says something, that's the only team they can beat in the Grey Cup game. Going further west, you have the Saskatchewan Roughriders, which are probably the most iconic team. They've got the big green S and the spectacular big green stadium there. And going further west, you have the Edmonton Elks, as Chris mentioned, formerly known as the Eskimos, the Calgary Stampeders, and then the BC Lions on the west coast in Vancouver.
And this year's 111th Grey Cup, Nick, is going to be at BC Place in Vancouver, British Columbia. I think it's November 26th or November 27th. It's always on a Sunday night, Robbie.
I will be there.
Robbie, I like your room. You're going to have to tell Nick and us a little bit about your room and your Buffalo Bills stuff and your Buffalo Sabres stuff as well. That's cool stuff. I see a Dominic Hasek banner too. Can you tell us a little bit about your stuff, sports stuff?
Well, Dominic Hasek was my favorite Sabres goaltender growing up. And and I liked his number because it he was the only one to wear that number in Buffalo.
Yeah, and he played for the Red Wings, my Detroit Red Wings. He helped the Red Wings win 2 Stanley Cups in 2002 and 2008. So that's cool.
Dominator played for Ottawa as well, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, my so while I'm kind of the Argonaut historian of the family, my father, he is the hockey historian that he knows way more facts about the history of the NHL than I do. But I think because of that shared sports history, it's gotten me into being what I am as an Argos fan. The Dominator is without a doubt the best non-Canadian goalie ever, and he's arguably at least top three. If you even want to put him as number one all time, I don't. I completely understand the reasonings for that in that era in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Like he's just such a phenomenal, amazing goaltender for what he did in Buffalo and in Detroit and Ottawa.
Hey, Robbie, I want to ask you this. I'm going to put the host on the spot. What makes Buffalo such a great sports city? Why do you like Buffalo so much?
I think like that we're like a hockey town plus the lacrosse team is good. And we got like the Bidens
And you got your Buffalo Bills too. Bills are pretty competitive.
yeah.
There are a lot of fans here in Toronto who are Bills fans. The Bill Mafia has stretched really big up north here, and I know a number of my friends when I was in university went down and went to those big Bills games, jumping on the tables and all of that crazy stuff. Unfortunately, not the same can be said of those going to Argonauts games, which thinking back on, maybe I should have done more encouraging. There's me and one other friend who were probably the two biggest Argonaut fans in the Wilfrid Laurier University among us. So definitely the Bills love has spread a lot more than the CFL love, unfortunately.
How do you feel, Robbie, the Bills will do this year with free agency? And obviously, Stephon Diggs was traded to Houston. I want to get your perspective, buddy, on do you think this Bills team can still be very good this year without Stephon Diggs?
I think this year the Bills could be competitive like without Diggs cuz we got like a talented tight end group in Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid,
Josh
Absolutely.
Khalil
Allen's still pretty
Shakir.
good.
By the
Yeah,
way,
Josh
we have
Allen.
Josh Allen is pretty good. We have Buffalo, New York native on the Argos too. He's not playing right now, but he wears number 12, and his name is Chad Kelly. And his uncle played for the Buffalo Bills. Do you know who that would be? And he wore number 12 for the Bills
Would
too.
that
Oh, yeah, Chad Kelly.
would
He
that
wears
be
number.
would that be Jim Kelly?
Correct. You win a prize. You got that. So, yes, there is a Buffalo, New York connection with the Toronto Argonauts. And hey, Steve Christie, who kicked for the Bills when they won Super Bowls, is from the Toronto area, by the way. And you had a quarterback back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, that won 2 Grey Cups with the Argonauts. And his name was Doug Flutie Flakes. He was pretty popular in Toronto and Buffalo as well. An exciting player.
I don't know if it was. I think it might have been with New England, not Buffalo. But I think Flutie still has the record for the last drop punt where
New
a drop
England,
kick.
New England,
Yeah, he was with
2005.
New England, But that's the thing I think he's most known for. So, and I think it wasn't long after he did it that they removed that, which is too bad. It's kind of we're dealing with a similar thing now in the CFL with this other weird punt rule, and rather than just embracing it, it seems like we're too quick to remove funny rules that teams try to take advantage of, which is kind of too bad in a way.
Hey, Robbie, we got a few more minutes. Do you have more questions for Nick and me? Just feel free to ask us whatever you want.
Chris, how did you like start like your freelance business covering the bisons and the bandits?
Okay, that I can answer. I started my camera work first, and then my podcast and my radio show. What I did was reach out to the bandits and the bisons. The bandits, I actually had John Gerkler, their broadcaster, on my show, and he kind of put a word in for me, and that kind of helped me get my bandits media passes. And I've been covering the team now for a couple years. And as for the Buffalo Bisons, I reached out to Pat Malacaro from WGR 550, who's the play-by-play announcer for the Bisons. Robbie, he's well known in Buffalo, Pat Malacaro, and he invited me down to do some independent freelance media work. So I don't work for the Bisons. I just do some independent media coverage. So I basically reached out to the Bandits and Bisons, and the same thing with the Toronto Argonauts. I reached out to them, and that's the thing. When you want to get into a career, you have to go out and ask people. Nothing's giving to you. You have to go out and ask. And a lot of times people will tell you yes, but sometimes people will tell you no. But don't let no stop you. And I just say no is not a failure. It's a setback, a temporary setback. And I've been very lucky. And I love covering your Buffalo teams and covering the Argonauts. And I did the Grey Cup last year and the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. And I've interviewed, I would say in the last 4.5 years, Robbie, I've probably between my show, which is virtually on StreamYard like you use, I've probably done about 700 plus interviews on virtual and in live interviews. And some of my favorite interviews, I've interviewed the Philly Fanatic, who's the mascot of the Philadelphia Phillies. I've interviewed a lot of guys that are well known in the industry, and I never thought they would come on, and they did. And I have one of your guys coming on my show on Monday, by the way, Sal Capaccio, who was on your show a couple years ago. Sal's a good guy from WGR 550. Robbie, how did he ended up getting Sal on your show? That's great.
I just reached out to him one time and told him I was starting a podcast and that I'd like to cover the Bills and we just started talking that way, and
just goes to show you don't know if you don't ask.
Exactly.
Chris,
go ahead, Nick. Yeah.
One thing I got to ask you about, because you haven't mentioned it yet. Can you talk a little bit about your experience at the draft this year in Detroit? Because you had one of the most interesting and amazing experiences with that behind the scenes look with the media there. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, the NFL turned me down a number of times, and this year I put in for a media pass for the NFL draft in Detroit, Robbie, which was in April, and I went to day one, and it was amazing. 275,000 fans. The city was shut down. I had to walk 7 or 8 blocks, and I've never seen so many camera guys in my life. There must have been 1,000 or 1,500 camera guys there. The top draft picks were all there, and I ran into Jaden Daniels, one of the top picks, in the bathroom there. So, and it was just a great experience. And the NFL is just such a corporate business machine, and It is huge. I'll tell you, everybody says the Super Bowl is their biggest event, but the NFL draft in 3 days, Robbie, they had 775,000 people in downtown Detroit. And downtown Detroit, by the way, has been cleaned up. And the draft experience was amazing. And talking to some of these kids that get drafted and then meeting other media. There were so many media there, including Davis Sanchez from TSN, Robbie. So if Buffalo ever gets the draft, Robbie, Buffalo's trying to get the draft in a couple years from now. I would tell you, Robbie, see if your family and friends can take you there. It's really worth going to. It's quite the experience, the NFL draft.
You got to interview the Colts first round draft pick kid, right?
Yeah, I got to talk to him. I got my picture with him and big kid, and it was just amazing. And yeah, it was overwhelming, Nick.
Yeah,
There's so many people.
imagine how they must feel being the guys drafted through all that. Like it's just like you said, it's nuts the kind of machine the NFL is with the promotional material and these guys coming out of college to become potentially future faces of their franchise. It's extremely impressive, and I'm glad you got to experience it from that media side.
Well, thank you, Robbie. I got to ask you this. I like to ask questions. Even when I'm a guest, I feel like I'm a host. But I wanted to ask you: the Bills drafted a wide receiver to replace Stephon Diggs. What's Keon Coleman like? Do you know anything about him, and do you think he'll be any good for the Bills?
Um, well, I haven't seen anything on him, like through highlights or um, like watching any videos of Keon Coleman, but I've I've heard from like reporters that he's a funny character that on the team.
Out of all the sports, Robbie, which team is your favorite? Is it the Buffalo Bills your number one team?
Um, well, it's like the Bills are my first team. Um, then I like the Bandits, the Sabres, and the Bison. So
One thing I'll plug in about the Buffalo Sabres, our PA announcer for the Toronto Argonauts, a fantastic individual by the name of Adam Goss. He is a diehard Buffalo Sabres fan, and I know he's been to a number of games. So maybe I'll uh, I'll tag him when this gets published out, and I'll hook you two up because I'm sure you would have a really good chat with him if talking a bit about the Sabres and how a guy like him and living in Toronto becomes a Buffalo Sabres fan. That might make a good story.
Nick, that's a great idea. I think Adam would be a great guest to have for Robbie to ask him questions about the Toronto Argonauts and talk about the Sabres. And hey, Robbie, do you get to go out to the odd Bills Sabres game as well in Buffalo?
um, I mean now that Lindy Ruff is back as the head coach of the Sabres, I'm I'm gonna try to go at least a like one preseason game and one regular season game to um check out the team and
I think the Sabres are going to be better this year. I think the Sabres. I think they could make the playoffs, but I think it'll be depending on their goaltending.
I one thing I gotta say with Buffalo is I like the accessibility, being able to at least actually go to a game here in almost any of the Canadian markets, especially in Toronto and Montreal. You gotta lop your right arm off to have a half decent seat. The nosebleed tickets start at $300 at least a game, and for any big rivalry game, if Pittsburgh back in the day with Sidney Crosby, or I guess now a team like uh, Florida or something, it's like $500 so a seat. So it's not easy to get to. I know when Toronto plays in Buffalo, a lot of fans make it down there to Buffalo sometimes to watch, but gotta back your own team up here and bring some Buffalo noise into the building.
Robbie, are you a big fan of chicken wings? Do you like chicken wings? Because Buffalo's known for chicken wings. You like chicken wings?
Yeah.
Yeah. You got a favorite place that you like chicken wings? So the next time myself and Nick are in Buffalo, we can try them out for chicken wings.
um maybe like where at the Bison's
Oh, the
um
ballpark. The consumers pub at the ballpark. Yeah, they
yeah
have good food there. You ever go
since
there? You make sure you say hi to Kaylee, who's the manager, and Amy, who's the assistant manager. They do a really good job there. And for anyone watching, if you buy a ticket to a Bison's game and get the buffet, you can get the buffet and the ticket for $31.95 for everything, which is a great deal. All right, Robbie. Do you have a last question for me and Nick for the both of us? You want to ask us?
um do you guys want to promote where um my listeners and where they can find your audio cast?
Chris, go
For
ahead.
for the Argo Bounce live audio show, we are live streamed on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter slash X, I call it, Twitch, LinkedIn, and Instagram. The Argo Bounce Live Audio Show is on all major audio platforms such as Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, and also on WQE 99.1 FM. And speaking of my other show, Live with CDP Sports and Entertainment Talk Show, it's on 2 to 3 times a week, and it's on WQEE 99.1 FM. And my website for your audience, if they want to check out all my media work and previous shows, is beacons.ai. That's beacons.ai/Chris D. Pomay. Nick, where can his audience follow you on social media as well?
Yeah, for me, I don't have as many sites as Chris does, promoting all over his variety of shows and networks. For me, I am a simple, humble guy on Twitter. Is usually the best place to follow me. NICK Nick underscore small SMALL underscore 38 is the best place to reach me. I am also on Facebook and Instagram, but it can be a little bit trickier to find me there. So Twitter's usually the best place to go.
All right, Robbie, and any final thoughts about our show tonight with you, Robbie?
um I think the the show was a good show.
Well, I think the guest did a very good job, and keep doing this, Robbie. If you do this on a consistent basis, you'll feel more comfortable and you'll do better. And it takes time. Just my advice to you or anybody out there watching this podcast tonight, you want to do a podcast, be yourself. Don't be somebody that you're not. So just be yourself and have fun with it. And talk to your guest, Robbie. Me and Nick would talk you the same way if we were at a Bison's game with you. This is how we are, and that's what makes a good podcast is good conversation and not scripted stuff as well. And I've learned that too, Robbie. When I first started this 4.5 years ago, I wrote everything down. It was all scripted, and I had a couple of guys on from the Toronto Raptors, Eric Smith and Chuck Swirsky, two guys that are well known in the NBA, come on my show, and they give me some advice. And they said, Chris, you can write down notes and points, but talk to your guests like you're having a natural conversation. And my guests have helped me improve my show over the years with their advice. So any kind of feedback you get, Robbie, always try to take it into consideration and just try to keep getting better every show. And again, the biggest piece of advice, natural conversation and just be yourself.
Yep, just echoing Chris. Keep doing it. I was a little nervous as well, but over time, I've gotten rid of some stutterings, ums and ahs, and that sort of thing. And the more you get into it, like you said, it feels more natural, and it makes your shows better. So that's all I can say.
And Robbie, the next time I'm in Buffalo covering the Bisons, it might not be until the end of July or August. I will let you know, and it would be nice to meet you in person, to have a selfie with you, and to talk to you for a few minutes in persons and stuff like that. Salem Field is a great ballpark too, and the Bisons have a good team. So I hope you get down to the ballpark this summer too, Robbie.
Yeah, I'm hoping to go down there for the Sabres Bisons when the Sabres come in and they they do their sessions um and then the Bisons wear the Sabre colors on their jersey.
The Sabres game night at the Bison's ballpark. Yeah, that's a great promotion, just like they had the Bandits there a few days ago. Hey, before we wrap this up, Robbie, we got CFL game tonight for your audience that's watching. CFL tonight, Ottawa and Winnipeg tonight. Saturday night, Calgary and Montreal, and Sunday, BC and Hamilton. So the Canadian Football League season, every week there's a game Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, just for your audience.
I'm looking up at it right now.
Um
Actually, I got it up on the side screen.
And the CFL's website, Robbie, is cfl.ca. That'll give you the league's website and all the information about the teams there, and CFL Plus that Nick mentioned. And if you're interested in the Toronto Argonauts, who have the coolest logo and uniforms in football, in our opinion, argonauts.ca. Argonauts.ca. Me and Nick want to see you down to a game at BMO Field this summer. Okay? Maybe your parents or your friends can take you down to a game at BMO Field, because I think you would really have a good time there.
We'll take care of you. That's for sure.
Any final thoughts, Robbie,
well
before we wrap this up?
well you Chris and Nick for coming on the show, and it was fun talking like the area codes in
Absolutely.
Canadian
Absolutely.
and NFL.
Yeah, Nick is in the 905, I believe. I'm in the 519, and you're in the 716. And that's a cool name for your show, 716 Sports Blizzard Podcast. Really cool name, Robbie. Catchy.
Yeah, and I'm also on the Buff fan base at Buffalo fan base network with
Okay, well,
Del
awesome.
Reed.
All right. And then, Robbie, you'll have to let Nick and me know about your next show, and if you have a guest coming on. And we'll definitely, we'd love, I can't speak for Nick, but I know I would love to come back on your show again in the future and talk
Same
Buffalo
here.
sports with you, or Canadian Football League as well.
Same here.
All right, Robbie.
And
Go ahead.
and my next show is with Joe Miller on the 12th of July, next Friday.
Same time, 8:15.
Yeah, same time with Joe Miller.
Okay, well, I will make sure I check out your show. Okay. That's awesome. And on behalf of Nick and me, we want to wish you continued success doing your podcast. And I thank you for having us on. Really appreciate it, Robbie. And thank you for watching our show the other night. We appreciate your support. And anytime we do the Argo Bounce Live audio show and you have a question, just type in one on the comments section, okay? There's a comment section on StreamYard, and people can type in questions in that. So make sure you put in some questions for us, okay?
Yeah, I definitely will. Thank you guys for coming on, and see you next time.
Thank you so much, Rob.